Greetings and welcome to St. Paul's United Church of Christ here in Wausau, Wisconsin. I still like to promote the use of the mask. We have a great one here. It says, "Be a blessing." It is from the United Church of Christ. There are other ones that are available as well. One says peace, one says love, and of course this one says be a blessing. If you're interested in ordering those, please call the office. Well, I've been thinking about some things as of late, and that's why we call these pastors' ponderings. And I've selected a text today that's familiar, really familiar to all of you. Honestly, it's the one that I struggle with, and I'll read the text and we'll talk about it just a bit. It is today from Luke 16, and I'm going to start with verse 19. It's simply called The Rich Man and Lazarus. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. He called out, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames." But Abraham said, "Child, remember that during your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides all this, between you and us is a great chasm that has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us." He said then, "Father, I beg to you to send to my father's house a message, for I have 5 brothers, that they may be warned, so that they will not come into this place of torment." And Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. They should have listened to them." He said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent." He said to them, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." And this ends my lesson today. Again, it's from Luke. So this text today brings up some really valid points. There was a rich man, says Jesus, who's dressed in purple and fine linens and who lives in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores, and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked those sores. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man who died was buried in Hades, where he was in torment. The rich man looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side, and called out to him, "Father Abraham, have pity on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in such agony in this fire." But Abraham replies, "Son, remember that in your lifetime you received good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony." If there ever was a parable of Jesus, that should keep us awake at night, it's this story of the rich man and Lazarus. Why? Compared to most other people in this world, we are the rich man. How many of you have ever noticed how often Jesus talks about our responsibility to the poor and to the downtrodden? For I was hungry, the Son of Man will say on the last day, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. I was in need of clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick, and I was in prison, and you did not visit me. They also will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing anything, or in prison or sick, and did not help you? And he will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. Now that's from Matthew 25. This parable, I think at least, could be entitled The Punishment of People Who Never Noticed. Who never noticed. That is one of our greatest sins these days. We simply do not notice. A recent chart showed the level of poverty of our nation's children compared to the levels of poverty living in other European democracies. What percent of children who lived in European democracies were poor? Roughly 5%. What percent of American children are poor? Over 20%. No industrialized democracy was even close to that high number of 20% of American children living in poverty. That isn't right, folks. And many of us follow our news and the stories that are in our own streets. But then we simply choose not to acknowledge the problem. Like the rich man in Lazarus' story, we simply refuse to notice. The rich man in this parable, of course, is not alone, or Jesus would have not told the story in the first place. All over the world in every generation, those who have much in terms of the world's goods turn a blind eye to those who have practically nothing. How else can we even live with ourselves? According to a report released by World Bank, 2.8 billion people, almost half of the population of this planet, still live on the equivalent of $2 a day or less. Of these, 1.1 billion survive on $1 a day or less. Does anybody really care? Well, a few do. But it is still amazing to what lengths we will go to as people to not notice. Brazil is a country with an even wider gap than the United States between the haves and the have-not. In Sao Paulo, Brazil, police have stopped seeking to remove the homeless from the streets. They've decided rather to gate them off in their own little communities. The city's rich have literally risen above by using helicopters to bypass these poor areas. There are 240 helicopter landing pads in Sao Paulo, Brazil. There are only 10, however, in New York City. So I guess that's one way to solve the problem. You simply fly over it. You simply ignore it. Get a helicopter. That should take care of the situation. The rich man in our story would probably have bought a helicopter too, if they were available back in those days. I would imagine that he settled for a gilded carriage with thick curtains so he could draw those curtains as he passed by the Lazaruses laying in the streets. Notice that Jesus said in this parable that Lazarus was laid at the rich man's gate. He didn't walk there. He didn't drive there. He was an invalid. He couldn't walk. Lazarus was totally helpless. There were no welfare programs. He obviously had no family to really care for him. All he could do was to beg. But the rich man couldn't even bother to share a few coins or a few moments. He refused to even acknowledge Lazarus. He was a man who simply refused to notice. But friends, I need to tell you that there is one who did notice. God noticed. Luke tells us that the crime of not noticing is something that we're all guilty of. What happens though next in our story? Well, Jesus tells us the angels carried Lazarus to Abraham's side. What a beautiful image. This time it wasn't friends or concerned neighbors who carried Lazarus home at the end of the day. It was the angels themselves. God knew Lazarus' situation. God cared. God loved Lazarus too. We all understood what Jesus was saying. God cares about everybody, even and especially those that society would rather not notice and definitely not name. God noticed Lazarus and cared about him. But God also noticed the actions of the rich man who refused to notice the poor man at the gate. Luke tells us the rich man also died and was buried. In hell, where he was in torment, the rich man looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he calls to him, "Father Abraham, have pity on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I am in agony in this fire." But Abraham replied, "Son, remember that in your lifetime you received all the good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony." Why do you suppose the rich man was in hell in the first place? It was because God noticed him as well. But why did God deal with him so harshly, you may ask? There is no record of the rich man being vicious or any glaring sins. No record of a vulgar public sin of any kind. He's not cruel as far as we know. He never ordered Lazarus from his gate or refused Lazarus the crumbs from his table. He was not a tyrant. He was not an oppressor of the poor. He was not a monster in society. Rather, he'd been an upright citizen. He was respected. He was even well liked. No earthly court would ever think of arresting or condemning him. In society's eyes, he was honored and highly honored. People liked him. They spoke well of him. So what was this sin that was so bad? Simply the sin of not noticing. How often do you and I take the time to notice the people around us? Their needs, their concerns. Not just the homeless people asking for handouts on the city streets, but the lonely teenager who lives down the street, or the young mom trying to keep her family afloat. How often do we notice the elderly person who has no one to visit, Or the jobless guy left behind because culture has changed and his job is no longer needed. How often do we notice people sitting just a short distance away from us, even in our congregation, who've just received some devastating report about their health or their marriage? Do we even notice what other people around us are going through? It is a sin that affects every single one of us to one degree or another. And yet we don't ever talk about it. We simply turn a blind eye. We don't notice. It is a sin of self-absorption. It is a sin of being so preoccupied with our own needs, our own concerns, our own cares, in this me generation, that we simply don't care about people around us. Here is the point of today's message. There was a time, spiritually, when every single one of us has been the beggar laying at the gate totally helpless. And Christ noticed us. And Christ loved us no matter who we are or where we are on our journey. As we remember that truth today, that compassion, that grace, Christ calls us to look around and see someone who needs our attention, our compassion, and our love. And what the research shows is that this person might just remember our generous attention when he or she is in a more positive place in their life themselves and turns around then and helps someone else. And so, then, that original act of kindness and love that is extended perhaps continues on forever. But you can't be a part of that chain of love if you never take the time to look beyond your own cares, your own concerns. Don't be like the rich man who will forever be remembered as the person who refused to notice. Look around you. Open your eyes. Be with me then for a moment of prayer. Wondrous God, we are living in a most unusual and difficult time. We see people who are hurting all around us for various reasons. Some are simply lonely these days. Because of COVID-19, they're kept away from family and friends. Some are without jobs. Some are without homes. Some are without even food to eat. May we open our eyes and be servants to them. This we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you for being with me today. Thank you for pondering this really difficult question. We all know that here in the streets of Wausau there are numerous homeless people who come right here to St. Paul's, to our own food bank and diaper depot, and who did come to the community meal, and we will get back to them as soon as we can. But help me think, how can we be of assistance? How can we open our eyes to everyone in need? Thanks for joining me today. God bless, and bye for now.